Hello and welcome to this episode of Trash to Track. In this episode I'm going to be looking at this kit-built J69 Buckjumper loco that I picked up from the local model shop as a bit of an impulse purchase. Just because I liked it and it looked really nice. And judging by this cobwebs and that around the axles, it's clearly not been used for some time. Another thing that attracted me to this model was the fact that it's already DCC fitted, so it saved me some work. And it's obviously worked on a DCC layout before, so let's have a look and see if we can get it going and use it on my layout. Now I'm just dusting it off there. As you saw, the cobwebs and detritus underneath was cleaned off. It looks to be in generally good condition. A few paint chips here and there, but it is all metal, very heavy. But a battery test proves that it's a non-runner, and I was told that this should work on DC. So I'm going to open it up and have a look what's going on. Now there's a screw here under the smoke box, so I'm hoping if I undo that, the whole thing should just lift off, and it does. There's the chip. Oh, well there's why it's probably not working. One of the pickup wires, because it's red from the decoder, has actually come unsoldered, so it's not actually picking up any power from one side of the rails, which is probably a good explanation as to why it's not running. So I'm just having a general look at the open frame motor. This isn't a triang motor, but it is very similar. Open frame, 3 poles. And like I said, the body shell's all metal. It is missing a footstep there. Cab footstep. But other than that, it seems to be in good nick. Very nice little kit, to be honest with you. So let's have a look at the chassis and give this a full service. Them cobwebs prove that it's not been used for quite some time. So the brush retaining spring has got this horrible thick heat shrink on it, so I'm going to change that. And the brushes were a right game to get out. They're an odd shape, so they don't just fall out like the triangle ones do. You have to manipulate them around that retainer. Now initially I thought I could get away with just cleaning the motor whilst it was in situ in the model, so I cleaned the commutator up with a cotton bud and meths like I normally do. I also polish it up with a fiberglass pencil because there is a mark all the way around it where the brushes have been rubbing over years. So I'm just trying to manipulate around here to get the best working angle on it. So turning the worm gear with my finger, I just polish up the commutator until it's nice and shiny. You only have to work gently with this, don't press down too hard or she'll mark the brass. And then once I was satisfied it was clean, I also cleaned the gaps in the commutator out, because these were full of carbon. Build up here can cause short circuits and poor running, so you've got to make sure everything's clean. And then it was given a final polish with cotton bud and meths. The brushes were also cleaned. These were quite dirty in places, so I gave these a clean just to brush off all that old oil and crud that had built up over there on them over the years. And then I put the brushes back into the motor. Well, first of all, I actually put a small amount of oil on the bearings of the motor. And I also oil the axles, because these axles are metal in a metal frame. And there's very, very little lubrication on them at all, really. So as it's metal on metal, it does need something. So a small dab of oil is all that's needed. Now, like I said, I am going to try and refit the brushes, but I will remove that horrible heat shrink. It's too thick. It is far too thick to insulate those brushes. Something very thinner needs to be used. That stuff hasn't even shrunk down properly, so it needs to be removed and changed. I also put some Labelle 106 grease on the worm gear, because the drive gear on the actual axle is starting to show signs of wear. Now you saw there with the battery test the motor did spin a little bit and then stopped. And it's that heat shrink is pulling the brush. When I put the battery on the terminals, one of the brushes is getting pulled off the commutator and isn't actually making contact. So I put the model up on 2 paint pots. Use a controller wire just to try and spark this motor into life. I have desoldered the DCC decoder. I should add that. I've taken the decoder off at this point so that I'm not back feeding any voltage into the decoder. But there was a short circuit and I couldn't work out what it was. And then I looked, and these pickups here, they were pressing on the back of the insulated wheel, and they're also pressing on the chassis. And then when I moved them, the motor sparked straight into life. So it was the pickups had been bent out of shape and were causing a short circuit. But with power from controller, you can see now that the motor sparks into life and is actually quite a good runner, to be honest. So I've left it running on these paint tubs, and I'm going to use the wheels rotating against the fiberglass pencil to clean all the wheels. Now the wheels were quite dirty. They didn't look dirty, but they were heavily oxidised. And once I'd used this fiberglass pencil, you can see just how shiny they came up. And after I polished them all, I also went over them with a cotton bud of mess to remove any surface dirt or dust that had been left over by that fiberglass pencil. And you can see there, I've just sped this footage up just so that you can see me cleaning the wheels. And it was at this point I decided to take the motor off because there was quite a lot of dirt underneath the motor. So holding the bolt underneath with a pair of pliers, I undid the screw, or nut I should say, from the top. And then eventually when everything's very tight fit on this model, I did notice that. But eventually the motor is wiggled free, and I can now clean the underside and the chassis. There's a lot of dirt in there. I should have done this at the start, really, considering how much cobwebs and that were underneath this when we bought it. The nut that holds the magnet in place was also loose, so that's another reason why I had to take it out, because I just couldn't do it up with it in situ. Now, one thing I didn't do, which I should have done at this point, was remagnetise the motor. I don't know why, but I just forgot to do it. But I have since done it, and you'll see it, and you'll see why when I take this to be onto the layout afterwards to run it, that there is an issue with this model. Now here I am, I mentioned this earlier, I'm removing this horrible thick heat shrink. There is no reason to insulate the entire spring when you DCC fit this sort of model. You only need to isolate the ends which touch the brushes. So here I am with some more appropriate heat shrink. This is very thin and fine stuff. And all you do is place it over the end of the spring. And I just touch it with the end of the soldering iron, and it shrinks down and conforms to that spring. And then it's not restricting the spring's movement like that other stuff was. I mean, I've got no doubt that it probably worked, but it was just so restrictive. And occasionally, if you weren't careful, it was just pulling the brushes off the commutator and stopping the model from working. But now with the battery test, with that new heat shrink on it, the motor works fine, whereas before it was being pulled off the commutator. So that is a marked improvement. So now the motor is properly serviced, although not remagged, and I am annoyed at myself that I forgot to do that. I'm going to clean the inside of this chassis, as I said, lubricate that centre axle, which is flangeless, and I don't understand why it's flangeless wheel, because it's a short wheelbase model, and having that as a flangeless wheel actually hinders performance. And again, I'll show you that in a moment when we put it back on the layout. So it's back, the motor's back in situ now. Battery test proves that everything is seated correctly and it's turning the wheels okay. Just a minor adjustment there to that brush, and everything's working. Now it's running slowly because the battery's actually dying. I've got a new one since. And here I am just resoldering the orange and grey wires back to the brush terminals. These are soldered direct to the brushes. And then I'll reattach that red pickup cable that had came off when we initially took the body off. And I actually soldered that directly to the screw that holds the motor in place because it was brass. And then giving it a battery test, and I've just got my finger on the decoder there to make sure it's not getting hot. And the chassis runs. So it didn't run very fast, but that's the battery. That's not the loco, that is the battery. Here it is on a controller on a set of saddles, and you can see it's running nicely, and you can see just how nice and shiny those wheels have come up after having been cleaned. So this is actually running in without the decoder. I've wired it across pickup to motor directly because the actual chip on this model was a Hornby decoder, and they are known for not liking DC running. So I actually ran it in like that, then refitted a new decoder. There was nothing wrong with the Hornby one, I just fitted one that was more DC compatible, and now the chassis will run nicer. And there we go. It's running backwards and forwards quite nicely. No head of speed there because, like I said, this battery is dying. And then it was a case of just refitting the body, and the body fits back by engaging the rear clips and then the screw at the front. And I also replaced some of the missing transfers that had been chipped, although the transfers I got are very old and they themselves chipped. So that's another job on the to-do list, is just to touch that front number plate up. I also made a step out of plasticard just to replace the one that was missing. And this little buck jumper is now ready to go on the layout. However, I mentioned earlier about a couple of problems. Now, this model, when it's running forwards, as you'll see here, it just stops at random. And nothing I did, no amount of cleaning or whatever I did, would stop this model from just stalling when it was running forward. And it became really frustrating, and I couldn't understand why. Running backwards, it's absolutely fine. But then I realised the chassis isn't exactly true, and it wobbles. The chassis is not dead straight, and this side with the pickups on, it's pivoting on the middle wheel. Now, if that middle wheel was flanged, I could put a pickup on it, but because it's not, it's pivoting on that, but this side it's not. So any small imperfection in the rails will stop this running going forward. But we're running bunker first. It's an absolutely superb runner. So I might have to revisit this in a future episode, but I didn't have time to do it this time, otherwise I wouldn't have had a video to go out this week. If you've got an engine or anything you'd like to see featured in a future episode of Trash to Track, please email me at dansmodelrailways@gmail.com. Have a look again, it's sent over, and it might even feature in an episode all of its own. So now it's running round bunker first. As I said, it's running nice. But if I put it on forwards, it stalls like mad. And it is because one side of the chassis is pivoting on that centre wheel. So I'm going to have to upend this and use a very small file, I think, just to take that wheel down a bit. I'm convinced that once all 4 pickup wheels are on the rails constantly, it'll run forwards no problem. So I will revisit this. It'll probably be at the end of another Trash to Track. I'll just put a bit of an update on. But I hope you'll agree, it is a good looking engine for a kit built model. And I'm pleased with it anyway. So thank you so much for watching again. Please like, share and subscribe, and I will catch you all in the next video. Bye for now.